Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. The next core set, Rage of the Abyss, has begun its reveals, and between all the shark cards in that set and the Marincess that snuck its way into the light attribute Duelist pack, the Year of Fire may finally be extinguished, and we're gonna help cheer it on with big thanks to this month's Quasar Commander and their request. Premiering in the August 2005 core set, Cybernetic Revolution, frogs and their counterpart toads are what it says on the tin. A bunch of frogs that have, despite their innocent appearance, been meta-relevant more times than many other archetypes. Whether they facilitated the powerful tribute summons of the monarchs, formed the backbone of a powerful control strategy, or having their own FTK, frogs are the refined choice for those looking to win the game at a slower pace. And today, I'm going to walk you through their arsenal and what made them so riveting. So pull up a lily pad and get ready to leapfrog to some conclusions, because it's time for Frogs Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. So what's the deal with frogs? Well, they're a series of water attribute aqua-type monsters, and early iterations of them are just kinda whatever they want to be. They're frogs! They're out in nature, they're having a good time. Who are we to impose such values as competitiveness to these innocent wetland creatures? Though, eventually, yes, some did wander into the 2006 US National Tournament, and left preaching the good word of the top tables, so eventually, these would trend towards a series of cards that generated monster presence quickly and cheaply. And while it accomplished little on its own, was able to take advantage of some very powerful win conditions to close things out. And we're also throwing in the toads, because they're basically unname-stamped frog monsters. In fact, we have to start things off with a very infamous toad that's been around for a long time. Slime Toad, a level 2 normal monster with 700 attack and 500 defense. A slime with the head of a frog, it attacks by croaking terribly. Now, we would normally just mention that this is a pretty neat unexpected die target because it lines up with a lot of modern frog conventions and leave it at that. But we've also got some history to talk about. Because Slime Toad is this card's real name, but for a long time it existed amongst us under a special alias, Frog the Jam! That's right, this was actually factually a frog monster when it first released here. But it wasn't long after it was introduced that the localizers had realized they'd done a bit of an oopsie. So when future cards were released that worked with frogs specifically, each and every one of them had to say that it didn't include Frog the Jam, a card that many people wouldn't even see because it wasn't even in regular circulation, first seeing print as part of the McDonald's promo packs, alongside such classics as Goddess of Whim, Cosmo Queen, and Euronzo. Eventually though, about 14 years later, Slime Toad would be printed with its correct name in an OTS pack, coinciding with another wave of fighting frogs in the format to clean things up. It's honestly a really cool story about the history of this game's localization efforts, and how even just calling something a frog can have huge ramifications down the line. I wonder how much that mistake cost the devs in ink for all of the except Frog the Jams they had to add though. Oh, and the other normal monster we have to talk about is Toad Master, a level 3 normal monster with 1000 attack and defense, a hermit frog that has been in existence for thousands of years. It attacks with tadpoles. And because the tadpole ray gun has been translated pretty literally in every game it's been in that shows monster attacks, Toad Master is known far and wide as the, well, look, I'm not going to say it here because this is a family channel, but go watch any given video about Toadmaster's attacks, and we only have one joke about this kind of stuff. It writes itself. Substitoad is a level 1 monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense, and you contribute a monster to special summon a frog monster from your deck, except Frog the Jam. An exception that I will add here for posterity, but I'll refrain from doing that in the future to maintain my sanity. It also prevents frog monsters from being destroyed by battle. This card may seem simple, but that effect has gotten this card outright banned in the OCG and is only available in a single copy over in the TCG. It doesn't help that we're looking at a non-once per turn effect that lets you tribute any monster to summon a frog from your deck, because then you contribute that monster to summon a frog, and so on and so forth until your deck has been slimmed out and your graveyard looks like a swamp. Now, because the card pool for frogs is generally not that strong, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. But when combined with one of our future cards, ReonPotato, this was part of a very consistent win condition known as Mass Driver FTK. Bit of a spoiler for later in the video, but ReonPotato's revival effect from the graveyard was also not a once per turn. So as long as you had frogs to feed it, you were looking at a free monster. Combine that with Mass Driver, a continuous spell that can tribute a monster to deal 400 damage to your opponent, also not once per turn. If you could fill up your grave with 20 frogs and 1 ReonPotato, you just burned your opponent to death right there. And good luck interrupting it, because this was way before the modern hand traps were introduced. And like we said, with enough frogs in your main deck, Substitoad can accomplish that all on its own. And even today, with Mass Driver banned and sub only at 1, it's still a staple in frog decks for its ability to tutor out any member of your frog-based theme. It just goes to show that when it comes to quality, accept no Substitoad. Or I guess, accept any Substitoad you can get. This joke is falling off the rails. Trade Toad is a level 1 monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you can tribute an Aqua-type monster to select a frog monster in your grave and special summon it. This is kind of a fixed version of Substitoad. They gave it a soft once per turn, and you can only tribute Aquas, so that's a bit more limiting, as well as only being able to pull from the grave, so no broader pool of frogs to grab from. You can only get monsters that you've already sent to the grave. As such, this card has barely seen any use, and thus has nowhere near the same notoriety as the original. Though, if we do get some honest-to-goodness Toad support down the line, this may end up being a nifty monster reborn if it's free and easy enough to summon. But for now, what did I tell you about accepting no Substitoads? I think that my pun was very clear and put together about this. Treeborn Frog is a level 1 monster with 100 attack and defense, and once per turn during your standby phase, if this card is in your grave and you do not control a Treeborn Frog, you can special summon this card, but you must control no spell or trap cards to activate and resolve this effect. Folks, we have stumbled upon another historically significant frog monster, as this was a prominent player in early Monarch builds. See, the big issue with them was that you had to give up a monster every time you wanted to bring one out, and with removal being the way it was, that just couldn't be feasible. But if you got a monster for free every turn, well, that was a different story. It did impose that no back row policy, which made it more difficult to play, as trap cards were very strong back then, but this would just lead people to setting only a single chainable card. That way they could get rid of it before their own turn rolled back around, so they could get that free frog. There's also this cute little interaction with enemy controller, where during the standby phase after you revive Treeborn Frog, you tribute it to steal a monster with the controller, and because it's still the standby phase and you don't control a Treeborn Frog, it'll trigger from the grave again, so you still get to have your free monster. And see, that's why you put at the start of the during your phase-based restrictions. You can't trust Yu-Gi-Oh players with stuff like this, I'm telling you. Center Frog is a level 2 monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense. It can't be used as material for a fusion, synchro, exceed, or link summon, and if this card is normal or flip summoned, change it to defense position. Once per turn, you can target a monster in your opponent's main monster zone and give your opponent control of this defense position card by moving it to their zone adjacent to that target. Then, if your opponent controls exactly 2 Center Frogs in the main monster zone, gain control of all monsters in between those 2 cards. So if they summon 2 monsters to their zones just below the extra monster zones, and you get 2 of these on the field, you can then move them to the 2 outermost main monster zones of your opponents, should they still be open, then take up to 3 monsters. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, pulling this off is an outrageous ask, but if you can do it, if you go to a real event and pull this off against a real flesh and blood human being, I will cry one true, single genuine tear that such a beautiful, trolltastic maneuver had been done in earnest. Truly, it would be a sublime epiphany. Even if you never actually want to summon this card to the center zone, hey, wait a sec, what's up with that? Dupe Frog is a level 2 monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense, whose name becomes Death Frog while on the field, something that will become kind of important later on. Monsters you control can't be targeted for attacks except this one, and when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can add a frog monster from your deck to your hand. This is going to be one of our preferred chump blockers, easily setting up an attack lock with the help of some extra summons, which we thankfully have an abundance of. Because it says accept this card and not accept Death's Frog, having 2 of these on board basically invalidates the battle phase.
We've been on this main phase for a little bit.
I can't attack. Oh, I'm sorry. It turns out my opponent summoned an attack lock, so I gotta think about how to move this game along. So it's gonna take me a bit. I set a card. Go ahead.
We shall not be moved.
Huh? So, take note, everyone looking to fight Tenpai. And if it does get run over, it fetches you another frog for you to play with. However, this card is famous for missing the timing on that last effect fairly often. It may seem like because it triggers if sent from the field to the grave, that would give you a lot of utility, but as a when effect, that means it will not trigger if going to the grave as material for any kind of summon, or if it's destroyed at chainlink 2 or higher. The name Dupe Frog is right because it duped us into the biggest deception of all, thinking this card is anything but a grade A, head-empty little goober. Never, and I mean never, trust anyone going around wearing an academic cap like that. It is a ruse! Flip-Flop Frog is a level 2 monster with 500 attack and 200 defense, and once per turn you can flip this card to face down defense position. And when this card is flipped face up, you can return monsters your opponent controls to the hand up to the number of frog monsters that you control. This effectively weaponizes going wide with frogs, because this is a repeatable way to clear your opponent's board. And if you have Dupe Frog pulling attacks away from it, you've got a pretty powerful compulsory evacuation device on your hands. But for the love of Raw, can someone please put this frog back together? Early Yu-Gi-Oh! Has some of the most fleshy, anatomically confusing creatures you've ever seen, and yet somehow this is worse than all of them. And can someone please get that card off of its tongue? That could be a Starlight rare for all we know. Poison Draw Frog is a level 2 monster with 100 attack and defense, and when this face-up card on the field is sent to the graveyard, unless it was attacked while face down and destroyed by battle, you can draw a card. So if you set this and it gets run over, no dice. But if you normal summon this and it gets run over, then you get to draw a card while you pay life points equal to how much your opponent wants to mess with you. But notably, it doesn't say that it has to be sent from the monster zone to the grave to trigger that draw. So this card actually became one of the best cards you could equip off of a very niche card, Sea Lancer. The idea would be to banish 3 copies of Poison Draw Frog, then summon out Sea Lancer, equipping those 3 frogs to it. Then, whenever Sea Lancer would be destroyed, one of the frogs would be destroyed instead, and blammo, that was a free card. It's so funny how even the worst frog cards in the game still compel players to think up the wackiest ways to make them work. It's honestly really impressive. Oh, come on, another card eater? Seriously, can we at least get some sleeves on these things? Ronin Toden is a level 2 monster with 100 attack and 2000 defense that cannot be used as synchro material, cue the obligatory progression polls reference. This card's name also becomes Death's Frog while on the field. Ooh, I can't wait to see what this mysterious card is. And if this card is in your grave, you can banish a frog monster from your grave to special summon it. Here it is, the one that made Mass Driver FTK viable, and went on to be a very powerful card for years to come. This became a new alternative to Treeborn Frog, giving you that free material without having to give up back row usage. But as time went on, it turned into the way to access Totally Awesome, a fantastic rank 2 monster we'll be covering later. It says no synchro summoning, but it also wasn't future-proofed. Accessing RXCs was one of its strongest traits, but it got even better during the modern era when a deck that loved the number 2 hit the scene, Sprite. Now, all of a sudden, you had wild access to as many monsters as you'd like that you could summon while under the Sprite lock, giving you rank 2 and link 2 monsters galore. It was so good that, well, that you actually can't use it anymore, because in the TCG, it is banned. It's incredible how many war criminals keep cropping up in this video and we're not even halfway done. Does this card deserve the ban? Maybe. But I definitely know it deserves to be told that its floral katana has not sprouted its signature 1000 petal blade. The draw cut on that one is not going to be doing anything. Submarine Frog is a level 2 monster with 1200 attack and 600 defense, and it deals piercing battle damage. That's it. It's a frog that's not stopped by defense position monsters. Though now is as good a time as any to mention that frogs kind of have their own field spell. Wetlands is a field spell card that gives level 2 or lower water aqua monsters a 1200 attack boost, which actually puts this at a nice 2400. That's pretty good, but a 2-card combo that ends on a kinda big monster with piercing is not going to be making it on the team anytime soon. Heck, it's not even in a submarine! What a poser. Swap Frog is a level 2 monster with 1000 attack and 500 defense, and you can special summon this card from your hand by discarding one other water monster. When this card is summoned, you can send a level 2 or lower water aqua monster from your deck or face-up field to the graveyard, and once per turn, you can return a monster you control to the hand to allow you to normal summon a frog monster during your main phase this turn in addition to your normal summoner set, except Swap Frog, and you can only gain this kind of effect once per turn. Now, ReonPotato may get the credit for being the repeatable summon machine, but Swap Frog is what made it work. Summon it for free with that discard, Foolish Frog, return it back to your hand, then use your regular normal summon on it to send ReonPotato, and then there you go. Now it's in the graveyard and it even has food to bring it out, all while retaining your extra frog summon. And now you can overlay for a rank 2, make a link 2, or whatever other rowdy stuff you've got cooking up in there. And because it can return any monster to your hand, you can do some very silly stuff to get certain cards into your hand that you wouldn't otherwise be able to search. One example was, during Sprite format, you could special summon the hand trap Maxi directly from your deck, in the OCG and in Master Duel, and then put it back into your hand because Swap Frog returns a monster you control, not itself, to get that summon. And yet, this card is untouched, though without Ronin it's nowhere near as terrifying as it was beforehand. At least mechanically. I'm not a fan of how it's looking at me. Why does it have to look at me like that one? Can we move on to the next slide, please? I'm feeling very uncomfortable. Unifrog is a level 2 monster with 400 attack and defense that can attack directly. And when this card successfully attacks directly, if you control a frog monster other than a copy of this card and the Jam, you can destroy a spell or trap card your opponent controls. Now, this card is a mischievous little devil. Combined with attack redirectors like Dupe, Unifrog can ping your opponent's back row safely, though since it only does so on attacks, you'll only really be catching a small amount of cards with this. 400 damage also isn't going to be something you can rely on when taking out your opponent with any level of expediency. So if you want to put your opponent on a meaningful clock, you will have to run Wetlands. But who would do something like glue a horn onto a little frog like that? That just seems like really deliberate animal cruelty. I mean, the only other alternative is that this is actually half unicorn, but I don't want to think about how that process would work. Beel's Frog is a level 3 monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and it gains 300 attack for each TAD POLE in your graveyard. That's right, it's time for a random card out of left field. TAD POLE is a level 1 monster with 0 attack and defense, and when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add any number of TAD POLEs from your deck to your hand. So in regards to Beels, this is an easy way to get your little buddies into rotation, discarding the ones that you searched for other effects to bring the Beels up to a maximum 2100, which on a level 3 normal summon ain't half bad, but otherwise, it's not very remarkable. But you never know when the TAD POLE legacy support will show up that takes the Skull Servant approach to gain the name in Graveyard and turn Beel's Frog into one humpking of a chompker. Death's Frog is a level 5 monster with 1900 attack and 0 defense, and when this card is tribute summoned, you can special summon Death's Frogs from your hand or deck up to the number of TAD POLEs in your grave. Alright, we've got a second payoff to the good old TAD POLEs, and while it was only really good at giving you a big board to work with, now you can make rank 5s out of these, even those elusive ones that need 3 or more material. But you do have to be running 3 tribute monsters, and you'd have to dump 1 or 2 TAD POLEs to the graveyard to make this work in the first place, and that's, well, without any good infrastructure for it, have fun with this in more limited formats, because it's certainly not destined for modern play. Alright, that does it for our main deck Froggos, and now it's time for a couple of extra deck ones. D3S Frog is a level 8 fusion monster, requiring 3 copies of Death's Frog as material. A fusion summon of this card can only be conducted with the above fusion material, and it gains 500 attack for each Treeborn Frog in your grave. That's... this card's kinda goofy. So this is one of the reasons why we have monsters that act as Death's Frog. Like, remember how Death's Frog can special summon other copies of it from the hand or main deck? Well, that doesn't really work with our name copiers because they only count as that while on the field. But that means they can be used as fusion material because they're not substituting it. They are actually Death's Frogs on the field. But the funny thing is, after that point, it doesn't really care how many Death's Frogs you have. It wants an entirely different frog in the graveyard, and Honestly, I think that's very funny. This means that it comes in at a respectable 2500, but can go up to 4k if you're able to fit all 3 of those Treeborn Frogs into your graveyard, which well reflects its gigantic design. My only question at this point is, who's on the hook for the damages to that street lamp? Because I don't think these frogs have a bank account. Totally Awesome is a rank 2 Xyz monster with 2200 attack and 0 defense, requiring 2 level 2 aqua monsters as material. Once per turn, during the standby phase, you can detach an Xyz material from this card to special summon a frog monster from your deck. Once per turn, during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell card, trap card, or monster effect, you can send an aqua monster from your hand or face up from your field to the grave to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Then, you can set it to your field. And if this card is sent to the grave, you can target a water monster in your grave and add it to your hand. This card is wild from top frog to bottom frog, and is the backbone of the frog control strategy. Not only do you have an Omni negate, it's an Omni steal. Monster, spell, trap, as long as you negate it, it's yours. And that's not all. The frog summon can get you a dupe frog, which by itself will help to absorb a hit, but if you already had a dupe, you can make that attack lock we talked about earlier. And if that wasn't enough, it recycles a water monster when it goes to the graveyard. So you can actually send itself to grave to fuel its negation, and then put it right back in your extra deck so you can summon it again later. Well, I mean, you get to do that if you're playing the TCG. If you're playing in the OCG or in Master Duel, this card is gone. It's very powerful and very beloved, but I guess in those regions, they don't really think this card is totally oh, it's been done. Alright, that does it for the monsters. Now it's time for the very truncated spell and trap section. Death's Croaking is a normal spell card that can only be activated while you control 3 face-up Death's Frogs, and it destroys all cards your opponent controls. That's right, we have our very own Ojama Delta Hurricane, and it's actually even easier to resolve since you can play multiple different monsters because many of them count as Death's Frog. You don't even have to play the original, just get enough Ronin Totems and Dupe Frogs out there and you're good to go. It's never been seriously used, but I feel like we're right there. A good way to add this in another nifty Death's Frog, and this control deck will have a board breaker the likes of which you've never seen. Partly because after it's been activated, you'll have croaked. Froggy Force Field is a normal trap card that you can activate only when a face-up frog monster you control is selected as an attack target to destroy all attack position monsters your opponent controls. This is one of those cards that was made after Mirror Force got hit on the FNL list, so they started doling out similar cards to specific archetypes to limit who could use it. We'd see something similar with plants in general with Wall of Thorns. So this gives you another defensive option to keep your amphibians safe, but it's not like people are playing regular Mirror Force now that it's off the list, so I wouldn't count on this showing up in anyone's list anytime soon, so don't let anyone bluff you out of an attack because of it. However, it does imply that frogs are capable of generating and controlling electromagnetic fields, or that Treeborn Frogs have some power granted to them by the Divine. Either way, how are they getting away with having such low battle stats? Alright, that's all the frog monsters we have, but what do we do with them? Well, we're going to have to cut a lot of our component monsters if we want to play a more modern form of the deck. But between Swap Frog, Dupe Frog, Ronin Totem, and maybe a few Flip-Flop Frogs, we can build on top of that to make a very strong deck with plays for days. We just need the Aqua cards to reinforce our game plan, the Trap cards to solidify our board state, and other silly nonsense we can hop onto. So what can we play to help them out? The archetype that comes to mind most often when it comes to frogs is Paleozoic. When they become monsters, they are level 2 aquas, making them perfect material for Totally Awesome. And then, because they became material, they won't get banished when they get detached as material. And that way they can be summoned out again the next time a trap card is activated. It also helps that the Paleozoics have really strong utility effects, ranging from Book of Moon, Mystical Space Typhoon, or setting up other trap cards in your graveyard like Lost Wind. Then you gain access to the Paleozoic Xyz monsters too, with Opabinia getting you even more Paleozoics, which means you have a pretty good resource engine to work with. We also can't forget the sprites. We've mentioned them in passing before, but since all of our best frogs are level 2, we can use them as an anchoring point to summon out our other sprites, because if they see a level 2 monster on the board, you can just special summon them right out of your hand, getting you either a search or some kind of negation to help keep your opponent's grubby mitts off your effects. Or to stop them from using theirs. And while the TCG no longer has access to Elf, which itself was a powerful card that got back our number 2 focused monsters and provided targeting protection, we still have Gigantic Sprite if we need to pull any frogs out of our deck, on top of numerous nimble monsters, though those help sprites out more than they help the frogs. For water support, we've got a lot of options. Silent Angler and Sea Nettle are level 4 monsters you can special summon right out of your hand, which seems at odds with the deck focused on level 2 monsters, but if we're having a hard time getting to Totally Awesome, we can always take 2 level 4 water monsters and make Bahamut Shark, which can summon any rank 3 or lower water Xyz monster from your extra deck. We can also use them to make Abyss Dweller, which not only gives us the ability to lock out our opponent's graveyard, a huge resource base for a lot of decks, it also gives all of our water monsters a 500 point boost, as long as a water monster is one of its materials. Now, while the toad you summon off of Bahamut Shark can't get you any more frogs, what with it not having any more material, it can still send itself to the grave for negates, at which point it can recycle itself. And speaking of recycling, salvage can be used to get back any of our frogs in case we need a couple more uses of swap or dupe. Or, heck, any other low attack water monster we end up splashing in up. Spooky Dogwood is always right there if you need help in time. We also have some Link monsters that can help bolster up our lineup. Mystara Boy is a bit of an older pick, but a 500 attack and defense boost will help make our monsters a bit better when standing toe-to-toe with the competition, and will decrease the stats of those filthy fire monsters. And Marincess Coral Anemone is just as easy to make, and gets your frogs right back out of the grave and onto the field. As for a silly tech pick, just play Fusion Deployment. I mean, I've tried to warn you, I've tried to tell you that some of these cards aren't going to make the cut, but if you insist on playing D3S Frog, then here you go, a card that gets you one of those frogs right out of your deck so you can polymerization it away. Heck, while you're at it, just play the Monarch Stormforth, tribute your opponent's monster for Death Frog. Sure, you can't summon anything from the extra deck, but if you're that committed to playing Death Frog, you don't care about that. You're playing Pot of Extravagance for the extra draws. You don't want to access Xyz monsters, you want to beat up your opponent's face with gigantic frog monsters, and honestly, if you've gotten this far, Godspeed. But if you want something that's a little less ill-advised, though not by much, you could also play Branded in High Spirits. Yeah, D3S Frog is a fusion monster with 2500 attack, so if you're on, say, an Ice Jade list, you can send any of those Aquas to the grave along with Big Frongus to search out any of the Albaz-related monsters. And at this point, Albaz the Ashen will have all of his bonus effects, so why not add targeting protection to all your other monsters? Alright, that's all the info I have about frogs, but how does it stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. From a random puddle of pond scum came a cohesive group of cards that put out the material to make more cards, focusing on slowing the game to a standstill while you gathered up your resources. Now, that sounds like most control strategies in the game, at least the ones that utilize monsters, and for the most part, that's actually pretty accurate. Even using the graveyard as a resource wasn't really a new spin on things, and FTKs were around long before Mass Driver showed up. But where I think the theme shines is in its boss monster design, because Totally Awesome is such a step up from other cards in its era. It doesn't just have a negate, but it also steals what it negates, really making them think about what they're using to bait Monsieur Tacklebox over here. Oh, and I guess taking on other monsters' names was pretty new when they started doing it, but nothing was really done with it, so frogs get a 2 in novelty. Objectivity. Back at its height, Paleo Frogs was so annoying! Chewing through 1 or even 2 of these Totally Awesomes, backed up with some of the most powerful trap cards in the game, basically checked any rogue strategy out of the format. You needed to have some kind of answer for big back row, supplemented by the Tower Toad. Nowadays, we have a lot more tools to deal with those kinds of setups, from Lightning Storm to Forbidden Droplets. It can still be pretty frustrating for a lot of duelists who are playing on a budget, but in general, I don't think this theme is going to be causing much of a stir in the immediate future, so frogs get a 5 in objectivity. Versatility. While our pool of available cards gives us a lot to lean on, our effects are a bit too insular to see play in other decks. They made for a strong engine and sprite to be sure, but aside from that, you don't really see a lot of frogs in anything. Maybe another series of level 2 water aqua monsters will hit the market that swap Frog and Foolish to the Graveyard, setting up their plays and opening up a new era of frog fraternity. But for now, frogs are getting a 2 in versatility. Awesomeness. Despite everything, I think the frogs are pretty cool. They have the flexibility to work alongside any number of rank 2 monsters, have a very strong boss of their own, and their interplay with Paleozoic is really cool. And it has puns! How can I not love puns? Frogs get a 5 in awesomeness, which means they land at a 14 out of 20 on the Nova scale. And that about does it for frogs. Of all the old themes that randomly get legacy support, this has gotta be one of my favorites. Coming from humble origins, this once aimless theme may get on people's nerves on principle, but it's hard to say no to a face, fruit, and tongue like that. But I'm still looking forward to the day we get a more combat-focused update to the theme. Not only could they use a few more bruisers, then we could start calling the theme Battletoads. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do frogs have a leg up on the competition, or are they a bit too bloated to see play? And which one's your favorite? Personally, I really dig Beal's frog's design. Red and black is already a killer color combination, but the way it's actually designed together really knocks it out of the park. Let me know about your favorites down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the lovely people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, the Critic of Innocence and Upstairs Media, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Owexa Toehime, Anansi Dragon, Kane Senpai, Chibi Gohan, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Comrade Copperbottom, Emony Chan, Eric, Frankie, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Gloomba 331, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Megacombi, Millennia Asta, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Scott 48, Serenity Towns, Skybuster Leo, That One Dumbass, Thievery Coast and the Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beelzephyr, Baron Von Titty Sprinkles, Beluga Master, Bernag, Blitzwolf, Blue Gem, Borger with a Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper R.I.P., Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Fabrizio Orpianesi, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Ignis Heath the True Draco Slayer, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh, Lobomaru02, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Mick Spoofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Nitromo, Obsidian, Ramen Resurrect Chan, Shizuki Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, Terror Top to 3, Tiger X 2476, The Pokemon 52, the Legendary Raven, and Zaldreka, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you checked out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see a video about Frog's best friends, check out this video I made covering Paleozoics. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Slime Toad, a level 2 big burpler.